Greetings, students. Welcome you all to this week 9 video discussing the topics of Unit 5, that is data collection, data analysis, and report writing. Okay, so in this video, we'll be discussing about the data analysis part and a brief introduction about report writing also, but we'll be covering half the portion in the next week. Okay, so let us now discuss only about data analysis part. So let me share the PPT for you. So this data analysis is in module 5. So in previous videos, we have discussed with the data collection, and this week we are going to discuss about data analysis. Okay, once you have decided that you have to collect the data using any of the methods which we discussed in last few weeks. Okay, once the data is with you, you have to now start analyzing it. Okay, and before you analyze it, you have to process the data. Okay, so data is not information. Okay, it is not a complete information, it is a raw fact which you have collected from your identified sample. Now it has to be analyzed. So before analyzing, you have to prepare the data so that it will be useful for analysis. Okay, once you have analyzed it, then comes the reporting part. So there in the next week we'll be discussing about the report writing and different types of report. Okay, so how do we process the data? Okay, we are going to discuss in this video, right? So the topics to be covered in this week are editing part, coding, classification, tabulation, and validation analysis and interpretation. So these things we are going to discuss this week, which covers data processing. Okay, once the data processing is done, then this data is ready to use for analysis. Right. So what is the difference between data and information? We usually keep on speaking about data and information, right? So what is the difference between these two? So data, as you know, it is the raw fact and figures, okay, which you have collected through maybe your questionnaire, through interview, through your observation, or through using schedules or any other methods, okay. So this data is very raw. Now, when you have to analyze, it has to be converted to information. So the processed data, the raw fact processed, and the processed data using some statistical analysis or techniques which will help you to draw conclusion, write an interpretation. So that forms an information. Okay, so this is the major difference between data and information. So data is the raw facts and figures which you have collected directly from the respondents, and when this data is processed to give you an information which is suitable for analysis, this is called information. Okay, so coming to data analysis part, or you can even say it as a data processing, right? So data processing. So in this data processing, what happens? The data, what I said, it is a real fact and figure, okay, raw fact and figure. So in this real world, it often comes with a large quantum, and the data is available in different formats, and which can lead to many meaningful interpretation that cannot be straight away achieved. So it has to be processed to get a meaningful interpretation or meaningful output. Okay, so this preparing of data to an information to analyze it, it is called data processing. Okay, so processing the data, raw data to an information is called data processing. Only after processing the data, it is easy or it is available for you to do the analysis. Okay, so coming to data processing, okay, there are two parts in processing the data. One is data analysis and the second one is interpretation of the data. Okay, so while processing the data, there are two parts. One is analysis, the other one is interpretation. Okay, so during analysis, it involves you to organize the data in a particular manner, and while interpreting, it is drawing the conclusions from the analyzed data. Okay, so during analysis, the data is organized in a particular manner, and in data interpretation gives you to write a conclusion, to draw a conclusion from the analyzed data. So these are the two steps in data processing. So what are the steps in brief? How do you do the processing of data? So what are the steps involved here? Okay, we said data analysis part. So how do you do that? First thing is you have to prepare the raw data. Once it is available, then editing, do the editing part. Third step will be you have to code the data and classify the data based on certain characteristics. Okay. Then whatever the coded data you have, classification you have made, you have to put it in the form of a tabular column. So there are many ways of putting in a table format. So different tabulations are also available. We'll discuss later. And then once it is done, you have to summarize the data and then use some statistical tools to get the interpretation. So this is how you do the processing of data. So start with preparing the raw data, then do the editing part, do the coding and classification, then finally tabulation. Once that is done, the data is now converted to information which is available to test your hypothesis. Okay. Preparing for the raw data. How do you prepare the raw data? So whatever the information or the data is collected might not be complete. It might be incomplete. Okay. And it might be illegible. Okay. And it might be inaccurate data also. So you have to prepare this data to go for the next step, that is for the editing purpose. So hence all this data needs to be arranged properly, right? So once the raw data is prepared, how do you do that? The initial step, you check the questionnaires. Okay, so before going for editing, you check the questionnaires. Okay, and for the completeness and interviewing quality. And if a questionnaire written from the field may be unacceptable for several reasons. So sometimes you would have issued the administered the certificate, administered the questionnaires, and you would have collected the data. For many reasons, the data might not be of useful. Questionnaire might be written back to the field because of several reasons. One is part of the questionnaire may be incomplete. Okay, sometimes the questionnaire might not be filled completely. The respondents might have ignored answering the questions, or then might missed out some questions to answer. And the pattern of responses may indicate that respondent did not understand or follow the instructions. Sometimes, as we discussed during questionnaire designing also, if at all the instructions and the question, the content and the wordings are not clear to the respondents, this might also lead to get some inaccurate data. Okay, and the responses show little variance. Okay, um, then the questionnaire is answered by someone who does not qualify for participation. Those who are not eligible, those whom you have not identified as respondent, might have responded for your questionnaire. And the written questionnaire is physically incomplete. As I told you, might be many of the questions have been missed out, or one or pages, more pages might be missing in that questionnaire. So all these things will happen when we are doing a field survey. Okay, so for many of these reasons, it might be the questionnaires might be again written back to the respondents. Okay, so all these has to be taken care, and the raw data has to be prepared to go for the next step, that is the editing step. Okay, so coming to editing part, the first step in processing the data. Editing is nothing but a process of examining the data collected in the questionnaires. So here what do we do is we try to detect the errors or the omissions, or we see if that they are corrected and the data is ready for the next step, that is coding and tabulation. Okay, and editor is completely responsible for seeing that the data are as far as possible accurate, uniformly entered, and it is complete. As I told you, you would have checked the questionnaire, so the data what you have got should be the complete data. And as far as the knowledge of a researcher, the data collected must be correct. Okay, and you should also check for any errors or omissions. As I said, if some responses are missing, if the questionnaire is incomplete, okay, if the respondent is not able to understand the question properly, all this has to be taken care during the editing step. So during editing, what we do, detect errors and omissions, we correct them when possible, and we certify that minimum data quality standards are achieved, and it guarantees that data is accurate, it is consistent with other information, it is uniformly entered, complete, and it is arranged and simplified for coding and tabulation. So editing helps us in doing or achieving all these things. So how do we do editing? Okay. So once we review the questionnaire with the objective, what is the objective achieve, for reviewing the questionnaire is to increase the accuracy and the precision for converting the drawing data into information. Okay. So we can first identify for the illegible, incomplete or inconsistent responses. Then there are two stages in which editing can be done. One is through field editing and the other one is through office editing. Okay, so field editing is to make sure that proper procedure is followed in selecting the respondent, so interviewing them and recording their responses. But the main problems faced in field editing are inappropriate respondents and incomplete interviews. Okay, so inappropriate respondents in the sense instead of house owners, a tenant might have been interviewed. Okay, so the respondent has changed here. Incomplete interviews, improper understanding, lack of inconsistency, legibility, all these are or the questions are filled by interviewer himself without conducting the interview. Okay, so these are all the errors during data collection process. So if at all the same thing has happened, in field, in personal, the questionnaires might be returned to the same sample and the corrections can be made. Office editing is, it is more thorough than field editing. So problems of inconsistency, rapport with respondent are some of the issues which get highlighted during office editing. So sitting at your office only, you can do the corrections, maybe as I told you, you can detect the errors, omissions and try to correct the responses. So what are the problems in editing? One is problems in editing, incomplete data forms. As I told you, will get the incomplete data forms. Obvious indication of bias will be there when the researcher gets himself involved in that. And errors while recording in the questionnaires during data collection process. Then inconsistency among the answers pertaining to some subject. And interviewer being dishonest, while collecting the data. Same thing as with respect to bias there. Then incorrect answers. After editing part, the data is now ready for coding. Okay, so coding is nothing but a process of assigning the numerical values or the symbols to the responses of the data set. Okay, it is just nothing but when we are analyzing the data, usually the data collection sample size will be very huge. Manually correcting and analyzing will be a tedious process. So coding helps us to do the analysis part very easy. So since we are using some softwares to analyze the data, the softwares cannot understand the characters. It can only understand the numerical value. So the coding of the data has to be done. So it is nothing but a process of assigning some numerical values or some symbols to the responses. So what are the rules of coding? While coding, what are the rules which we have to follow? One is give codes for each respondent, give codes for each question, give codes for each response, give numbers for qualitative response, and do not delegate the work of coding to others. Okay. Then there are different types of coding. One is numerical coding, alphabetical coding, and zero coding. Okay. Numerical coding, as the name itself says, coding compulsorily has to be in numerical value. Okay. And alphabetical using the alphabetical representation. Zero coding implies that there is no response. Right. Then All the data which used must be converted into numerical form. So if the analysis has to be done on the computer. So as I told you, since we are using some software for data analysis part, so all the data which after editing has to be coded with some numerical values. For example, we usually use male and female gender in our questionnaire. So we can code the gender male and female as 1 and 2 respectively. Okay, so we are coding male as 1, female as 2, just to classify. Okay, not to number or not to rank, just to classify them, just to identify that 1 means male, 2 means female. Okay, so this is called coding. And usually nominal scale variables need to be coded and entered into the packages. Okay, and one has to remember which code stands for what. So once you have started coding as a researcher, you should remember which code you have assigned to which item. Then after coding is done, the next part is classification. So when open-ended responses have been received, you know what is open-ended. Classification is necessary to code the response. For example, the income of the respondent could be an open-ended question. From all responses, a suitable classification can be made. Okay, so if you're collecting the income level of the respondent, you may leave it open for them to answer. Once you collect everybody's data, then classify them into, group them into different categories. Rules and guidelines should be linked to the theory and the aim of the particular study, and the scheme of classification should be complete. Once it is done, then transcription of data to the computers. Okay, when observations collected by the researchers are not very large, simple inference that can be drawn from the observations can be transferred to a data sheet, which is a summary of all responses. So researcher may adopt manual or computerized transcription here. Then tabulation. So once the data you have classified, now it is ready to be put in the form of a table. So this helps in data analysis. It makes data analysis part very easy. So tabulation is a process of summarizing the raw data and displaying it in a complete form for further analysis. So analysis of data is made possible through tables. So tables can be divided into many types like frequency tables, univariate tables, bivariate tables, statistical tables, etc. Okay, so arranging the data, processed data, classified data in the form of table is called tabulation. Okay, so this is the format of a blank table. You will have a table number, you will have a table title, and if at all required, subheading of the table, the caption for the table, body of the table should contain the main content, footnote, and total column. A blank example, a blank table. Then when you're preparing a table, the following steps needs to be followed. One is title of the table should be given and it should be very brief, simple and clear. Then each table should have adequate columns and rows for analysis. It should have the captions and stubs. And columns and rows should be divided into thick rulings. You should be able to differentiate. Figures should be arranged properly. Size of the column should be adequate. Then units of measurement should be mentioned. Approximation should also be noted below the line. And footnotes may be given below the table. And total of each column and grand total should be in one line. Then there are different kinds of tabulation. Simple tabulation, a simple table. So here, if at all you have multiple choice questions which allow only one response, may use one-way tabulation, or it is also called as univariate, in the sense one, uni in the sense one-way tabulation, or simple tabulation, or univariate. Okay, in simple tabulation, every question is treated separately. So for example, gender. You have only gender, one variable. So male and female, how many numbers you can have, and you can put the total column. Similarly, gender of the respondents. Same thing has been put in the table column. The percentage you can make, number of respondents and percentage with the total number. Similarly with the income group also. Okay, so less than 10,000, 10,000 to 20,000, 20 to 30, more than 30,000. This is a classification made. Number of respondents who said that their income is below 10,000 and their percentage. At the end, the total column. This is one way or the simple tabulation. Next, if at all the questions have multiple responses, okay. For example, what do you like about a soap you use? Maybe the lather, fragrance, moisturizing content, mildness, etc. You have multiple responses for an question. Then you can prepare the table like this. You can have a column for parameters, options which you have given. You can have the number of respondents. If you want, you can even have the percentage column and the, as usual, total column. This is very simple and one-way table. Once this is only for a single parameter. If at all you have more than two parameters or variables, you can go for cross tabulation. Okay, so frequency distribution, what we discussed in the previous slide, describes one variable at a time, but a cross tabulation describes two or more variables simultaneously. Okay, so it will, for example, in this table, gender is one variable and usage of Nike shoes is one variable. So you're putting both the variables in one table. So you can see the usage, light users, medium users, heavy users, and column heavy users, three categories you have made, and you are comparing with the gender, female and male. So how many are light users within female and male? And the row total, how many are medium users, male and female? The total column you are mentioning here. So coming to the analysis and interpretation part. Coming to the analysis and interpretation part. So once the table is prepared, the graphs corresponding to the respective tables are also prepared. So this analysis helps to understand the overall responses of the respondents, and interpretations or the inferences can be drawn from this analyzed data. So we have many statistical analysis for business research. Univariate we have discussed, bivariate analysis. So sometimes marketers will come across situations where one or more complex involving situations involving two or more variables. Okay, but in bivariate analysis, we'll be having two variables which has to be tested at a time. Okay, so univariate stands for one variable, bi in the sense two variables at a time. So this bivariate analysis example is chi-square test. Okay, so the chi-square test which we perform, the statistical test, is a bivariate analysis test. So in chi-square test, what do we do is, with this test, we will come to know whether two or more attributes are associated with each other or they are not associated. But also we cannot measure how much the association between the two attributes. Only thing we will get to know whether both are associated or not. But we will not get the extent. So the formula to calculate is chi-square is equal to summation of O minus E whole square divided by E. O is observed frequency, E is expected frequency. Coming to multivariate analysis, we have many techniques. So uni is 1, bi is 2, multi is more than 2. We have many analysis tests like ANOVA, discriminant analysis, conjoint analysis, factor analysis, and cluster analysis. Okay, so these are the 5 multivariate analysis tests or techniques. Coming to ANOVA, ANOVA means analysis of variance. So in marketing research, just like laboratory, certain marketing related variables needs to be manipulated, and the changes in the other variables has to be observed. So then we are using ANOVA. So ANOVA can be used to study the cause and effect of one or two more variables or factors on a single dependent variable, right? Then to find out, for example, to find out how the customer rating of milk powder differs with respect to three qualities of milk powder, or whenever a marketing mix, independent variables such as price, promotion, packaging is changed, how will be interested, the researcher will be interested to study its effect on the dependent variable. Okay, so ANOVA can also be used to tell the effects of specific variations in one or more elements of marketing mix, right? Then discriminant analysis. So the major application of this technique is the researcher wants to distinguish, discriminate between two or more sets of objects or people or brand, anything for that matter, based on the knowledge of some of their characteristics. Okay, so two or more groups are compared along with demographic and socio-economic factors. For example, selection process for a job, admission process of an educational program, consumer behavior patterns, users, non-users, all these things. If you want to compare a salesman with respect to their efficiency, good salesman, poor salesman, medium salesman, you want to classify them, discriminate among their qualities, you can go for using discriminant analysis. So the main intention of using this is to distinguish or discriminate between two, how the two sets of people or two sets of objects are different from each other, right? Then factor analysis. Okay, so when we start collecting the data, for sometimes what happens, we get huge amount of data. So these techniques, this factor analysis technique is used to reduce the data complexity by reducing the number of variables being studied. Okay, the only thing is to reduce the number of factors to few factors. So, for example, to find out the factors influencing consumers' being buying decision, no specification of independent and dependent variables. Okay, and it prepares a factor matrix. Preparation of factor matrix is also required. Okay, so you want to find out which are the important and key factors to explain the behavior, right? So, for example, two-wheel purchase decision. So, how does it affect? What are the factors which affect two-wheeler purchase decision? Maybe it is fuel efficiency, durability, spare parts availability, breakdown efficiency, all these things. Okay, so this all these many variables can be reduced to few variables. For example, you say comfort, first factor, personal factor, second factor, price factor, third factor is technical factors. Okay, all these like spare parts, durability, breakdown, all these comes under technical factors. So you can group these common characteristics, the factors which have common characteristics into one group and make them as one factor called as technical factor, right? If at all you feel like the look of the two-wheeler or the price of the two-wheeler, it goes to some other, you can group them under some other factor and say factor 2 or factor 1. Okay. Coming to cluster analysis, cluster means group, all right? So grouping of similar objects here. So here, suited for segmentation applications in marketing research. This is used for classifying persons into small number of groups or clusters. So how do we do that? What are the steps involved? One is formulating the problem, then select the samples to be clustered. Okay, like for example, buyers one group, products one group, employees one group. Okay, then identify the variables like product attributes, buyer characteristics, employee qualifications. Select the clustering procedure. Okay, then classify variables into clusters based on the similarities. Each cluster consists of variables that correlate highly with one another. So then map the and interpret the clusters. For example, you can see in this graph the cluster analysis based on age, income, and family size. So here cluster analysis segmenting car buying population in metro cities. So A is potential buyers of low-end cars, and B is mid population, and C is high-end people who are trying to purchase the car in the metro city. So based on family size, income level, and the age group, you can form a different clusters. Conjoint analysis. So this is concerned with the measurement of joint effect of two or more attributes that are important from the customer's point of view. So it captures the exact level of utility that an individual puts on various attributes. Okay, so it also tell what utility level consumer tries to see in various attributes of the products like price level, sales, service, product features and all. So this technique used to determine what combination of attribute is most wanted by various groups of customers. So you want to check the joint effect of two or more attributes. Okay, that is a combination of attributes which are liked by the customers. Right. So conjoint analysis will enable a direct comparison between the utility of, for example, price level, rupees 400 versus rupees 500, delivery period of 1 week versus 2 weeks, or after sales response of 24 hours versus 48 hours. So a combination of factor together working for a or preferred by a customer. Okay, so then a conjoint analysis can be done. This is an example for a laptop. When you're buying a laptop, what are the attributes which the customer prefer? And you can have a conjoint, in the sense two or more factors put together and then preferring to buy the laptop. Okay. Right. So this is an example which we can work out. So this are the steps in processing of data, what we discussed. First, start with questionnaire checking, then prepare the raw data for editing. Once editing is done, coding can be done, then classification of data, tabulation, and then start using some statistical analysis techniques to analyze the data and to get the interpretation. This is all for this week's video. Hope you have all got a gist of this week's topics. See you in the next video with report writing. Thank you.